but actually sometimes just going back to basics and looking at this is really key to the development and the growth of our clubs. First of all, I know leading on from Sean's webinar last week, awareness, so word of mouth, online presence, that's where you tend to find most of your members, which obviously generates either from an interest or generates interest in the sport, in your club, whether that be at university, in a region, etc. Generally leads to an introduction. We'd hope that people obviously then, drop an email and say, I'm interested in playing, or they turn up at training. The key bit in all of this is the induction and what latches them to coming back and staying. So, the more welcome you are, the friendlier you are, how they're made to feel, have you given them the information? Because when a member's got to go looking for that, how do I pay to keep coming? When is training? If they've got to go and do that research, it becomes a lot harder to retain them. And then obviously once they are retained, they become your advocates. And really it's a giant circle. Once they're retained and they're your advocates, they help to raise that awareness, and we grow year on year, hopefully, and as an establishment. Now, the answer is pretty simple, or it is when it's written down on paper, providing everyone with the opportunity to feel part of a club. However, we've all probably heard these statements, well, it's easy to say, but we've got X issue. How do we do that? People don't want to help, or they don't want to go out and tell people about clubs, etc., which is fully understandable, but how do we then obviously address that? So in a recent Sport England study that's been carried out in January of this year across a number of sports, 70% of volunteers don't think enough is being done to recruit new volunteers. And the reason I'm moving on from members to volunteers is your members essentially are your workforce. They are your volunteers, and they are the future of your club and of the game. So if 70% of people within clubs don't think that enough is being done, what can we do to help change that and get more people involved? If you don't ask, then you will never know. And I've outlined here a table, which obviously is kind of one way of doing that. There's much more interactive ways of doing this. On social media, you can ask and run polls. And sometimes, especially with younger generations, they'll click yes or no on an Instagram poll really quickly. You'll get their names and then you can approach them. A lot of the time, we just don't ask people. So when they're new to the club, what is the process of sign up? What are we asking them? Are we using SurveyMonkey to find out about these different things? When we're registering people, are we asking them what their interests are? How much time do they have? Because obviously time is a massive factor in all of this. And they've listed along here a number of different areas that someone might be interested in. But take Sean, for instance, his day job is obviously in media and marketing. But we need to remember not to pigeonhole Sean, because he might actually really want to get involved in DIY and maintenance, because he sits looking at a computer all day, every day. And actually he wants to get involved, but just doing something completely different. And that's really okay as well. And he might only be able to give 30 minutes, but he's helping in one way or another. And then I've put the line at the end, would you rather take on a small task? Because I think a lot of people, when you ask about volunteering, they think, oh my gosh, they want me to be a finance role or head of events, or these big titles that we give to volunteering, which sometimes can obviously scare certain people away. This obviously leads me on really nicely to the impact of COVID. And we don't really know what the impact of COVID will be, and we probably won't know for the next couple of years. However, foresight can obviously tell us a lot of things. So what we're understanding at the moment is that there's potentially less club volunteers going to be around. You know, yes, the vaccine is being rolled out at an incredible rate, which is fantastic, but people might still be nervous about returning to a larger group environment. People might be unable to do their usual roles, or they might not want to do that. You know, they've refound time with their families. A lot of weddings have been postponed, so actually they might not be able to commit to that role because they've got a lot of events that they now need to fit into their calendar, and actually they want to catch up and see people they've not seen. Sport England have identified that they think as many as 14% of volunteers are not going to return, which is obviously a massive number, and studies being shown in Australia are coming out that potentially up to 70% of volunteers are not returning in the capacity that they were previously. So that gives us a lot to think about how we can identify that and change the way that we can and operate what we know that we can. So essentially, there's a need to recruit new volunteers and also redeploy those existing volunteers that we have potentially. So I wanted to present to you tonight an idea that is used in some different sports around duties and not jobs, making things a little bit more manageable for individuals. So I've got a couple of options here. The first option that I've outlined with Sandy here is that she's offered to help. The club's latched on to her, and you know, an email's gone round and Sandy's now got several different positions. She feels a little bit overwhelmed by the whole situation, but she's offered her help, so surely she can't say no. She then becomes a key part of the club, spends many years involved, sits on lots of different committees, and finds it really hard to start giving those roles away. She eventually steps down and there's a really large hole that's left, and then the club goes through that kind of cyclical process again. And then obviously, as the duties not jobs, option 2, Sandy's offered to help again, but this time the club split down her jobs into duties. So Sandy doesn't feel like those duties are overwhelming. She can pick up the duties that suit her in her schedule. If she's not available one weekend, you know, they're much more manageable to pass to other people. She can obviously give back, but she's not attached to the club by a title, and therefore she has these small chunks which are a lot easier to fill with lots of different people. So a kind of demonstrable example might be in a club if you were having a kind of reunion, get back playing day with a big barbecue, etc. Rather than saying to one of your parents or one of your helpers, volunteers, look, can you run the barbecue all day and be in charge and be chef, essentially? You could break that down into, you know, person A, can you do 2 hours? Then person B, can you do another 2 hours? Person C, the final 2 hours. And that gives you the option for them to still be involved in the day as well. They give back some time and then they're involved, but it's not, you know, an all-consuming job on that day. So I've kind of looked into that a little bit more here, and was recently on a webinar with the Royal Yachting Association, who uses this model quite a lot within their clubs. And they've conducted analysis on this. And when they've broken it down and looked at the duties, 62% of those duties were being completed by 20% of the people who'd responded. So what that shows is obviously that the people that are highly committed do nearly 2/3 of those duties. Of the 38% of people or 38% of duties that were left, there's actually quite a lot of people within the club that don't do anything, and didn't always feel that it was a fair share within the club. Obviously, it's from a different sport, but it's got a way of showing you how, even with duties, it can still be kind of top loaded in certain aspects, but it makes you think about whether there's a way to split those up And even with the members that are doing less, they're still completing about 7 duties each, so a much more broader remit. Obviously, we've talked about Sandy previously and her being heavily involved, and I just wanted to come back and touch on that. I've kind of titled this the whirlpool of doom, and I think many of us on here probably could recognise this. You know, an individual who has a small number of people, or sorry, an organisation that has a small number of people, they do the majority of the jobs. They take ownership and pride, which is absolutely fantastic, and that's what we want our club members and volunteers to be doing. However, they can become so busy doing that job that they don't always embrace the less experienced volunteers, or they don't see that those that are newer to the club want to get involved and want to help. So that can often leave new people to your club feeling like they're not needed or that they're too inexperienced to help. And then the task owners perceive that no one is actually helping them, and that the narrative is kind of all down to them, and we end up going in this big circle. And I can definitely relate to that when I've been involved in clubs previously, and I've got so entrenched in things that you don't see outside of you, or you just think that that's the only route. And actually sometimes just stepping back and looking at the people around and asking, do other people want to help? You know, how do they feel about different things? I think sometimes we forget that the most valuable product is talking to other people. So some barriers to members becoming volunteers, and kind of why would they want to be? Well, we have to remember that they were a member first. So what made them become a member? And obviously that relates back to the very start of this presentation. Someone obviously talked to them, or something online made them come to your club, made them feel like they were really welcome, and they really enjoyed the experience. So how can we emulate that through to volunteers and continue that cycle? Some people just want to be members, and that's absolutely fine. They're paying to be a member. So why would they have to do volunteering? And they don't. But what we also have to remember on the side of that is that we should never turn down a volunteer. And I know sometimes that within the youth setting, we have some really keen parents, and some parents that may have a reputation, and we think, oh, well, we don't want them involved, etc. in our club. But actually, that small task and them being involved can mean the world, and actually you might end up relying on them further down the line to become your next key members on a committee. So the 3 barriers that have been identified by Sport England and Club Matters is 1, tensions with other members. 2, as I mentioned, the transactional view of membership, and paying to be a member, so not wanting to be involved. But the biggest one actually is just not knowing how they could get involved. And so I want to explore that over the next few slides and the motivations around that. The biggest motivation for people to increase their membership to volunteering and increasing their volunteering are the 4 elements outlined here. So the sport itself, the social aspect of playing sport and being involved in a team sport and a club, what it gives to them individually as a self, and also the community around that club. Ultimately, if members are able to get involved and can see others completing duties, they're more likely to volunteer and tap into those factors above that we've just talked through. So as we move to the next slide, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into those things and why that impact on people wanting to be volunteers. So the sport, the love of the lacrosse, learning to play and improving, pushing in the sport, and sharing the sport with other people. So how can we emulate that into a volunteering role? Well, maybe that's that individual that really finds that sharing the sport element key to them becomes your new recruitment officer or has a role within that. What about myself? So learning new life skills, developing confidence, gaining experience, receiving training, and building an identity and feeling proud of oneself. So a really simple thing potentially for a club to do is someone that wants to receive more training or wants to get involved, maybe they want to get involved in officiating or coaching. Can your club cover the cost of that qualification? That person then feels really valued. They're learning a new life skill, but actually the club's benefiting massively from that person holding that qualification, giving back their time. But having removed the cost from the individual and themselves, they feel a lot more valued. The social element, meeting new people, the friendships, the taking part in social events. Well, I think transferring that into volunteering is quite clear to see. You know, maybe the social secretary or the event organizer, you know, getting involved and building those, going along with those ideas, linking it into different days. You know, World Lacrosse having different events on, can we do a barbecue, watch something, etc. And then into the community, feeling part of that network and giving back, sharing the ownership and contributing and helping others. You know, obviously a massive area through this last year has been community, and I'm sure a lot of clubs have gone out and done lots of different things to help out, whether that be meals, whether that be shopping for people, or even just getting involved in different things for the NHS, whether that be sponsored runs, etc., etc. I think that's an area that we can really tap into going forward and coming out the other side of this pandemic as we continue to do so. So tapping into that motivation, I've outlined 4 different areas here of how we can do that, creating different atmospheres, offering different activities. I think it's about thinking outside the box to create that identity of your club so that you can then take that through to building more members so that you can do more events. So organising events that appeal and are accessible to all members. I'm just going to pick a couple of things off of this slide here. Inspiring members to feel like they can develop in their skills, and creating a belonging to the club, and also the kind of lacrosse activities behind it. Something that I thought was really interesting to think about was, when was the last time a stranger joined your committee? And if you can kind of tap into that and think about how they were made to feel, that can give you a really good understanding of your membership, and learn whether your committee is listening to your members. How volunteering is framed within your club is obviously going to be very different from the next club. But if you can be honest and understand how many volunteers it takes to run your club and how many volunteers you actually have, when you start writing it down on paper, I think a lot of us will find that potentially the remit at the moment is quite small, and we want to expand that and get more people involved. Or we might see the opposite, that we've got a lot of people involved, but we're not really sure, you know, the structure or the roles or how certain people are involved. So tapping into those volunteer motivations is a really key to understanding and learning. And then the opposite side of that is how we address the vulnerabilities of a club. And I've outlined that here in 3 different sections. I think one of the biggest areas of vulnerability is we may just send an email out and say, does anyone want to help? And that's really easy to hide behind a screen or to hide behind emails and not reply. But if we make volunteering and being involved in a club, and I know I've kind of said volunteering, but a lot of people just feel at home when they're involved. If we make that part of the day-to-day life, then obviously we remove that kind of element of ask. So, you know, can we engage more with people? Is there tensions at the moment between committee members and club members? Does that make it seem less welcoming? You know, at the start of the membership, do they get, you know, a kind of pocket guide of all the information that they need to know? Does that help them to progress on their journey? Are we rewarding people for the elements that they're involved in? Is there kind of transparency of where the membership fees go? So it is transactional, but what does it cost to run the club? Where does it go? You know, can we be better with that money and run events? Are there other things that there's money there for, but they're not being done and people want to get involved? And then really supporting the skills and interests of your members to help grow and diversify. Just changing tact a little bit here, the new breed of volunteers. Now, as with everything and as we progress and technology moves on, we've now gone through COVID, and then the Generation Z that is kind of being talked about more and more in the media. This book, The New Breed, Understanding and Equipping the 21st Century Volunteer, is a really highly recommended read from myself. And I've outlined a few kind of terms here, I've highlighted them, around what it means in terms of the new breed of volunteers. And just something to be aware of, because I think sometimes we can think these people are being difficult, but actually they've just got a different outlook on certain things. So some of these seem quite harsh, won't tolerate working alongside incompetent people. But actually, if we can give them some freedom to do that, or doesn't want to be micromanaged, they're really tech savvy. Can we empower them with an area that maybe the club has struggled with before, or someone's not doing at the moment, so that we give them that flexibility to run the Instagram account or to build an online presence that Sean obviously talked about in his webinar last week, to continue developing and engaging with all areas of our sport and everyone that is coming through. I know from talking with different regions, obviously, changing university players into club players is an area that needs work on. Well, if we can harness some of these things written here, is that what the university player needs to get involved? So as we're kind of coming into the summary area here, how do we challenge current volunteering models? And the key 3 things to remember are understanding what barriers might exist, considering how well motivations are tapped into, and then maximising those motivations to minimise those barriers. And hopefully you'll see that's been a key theme throughout this webinar in the areas that I've talked about, but will give you some ideas to take away and think about more clearly. So the future, what can we do to address things going forward, to come up with new ideas, and to take away some really key positives, hopefully, from this? Well, what about a volunteer handy guide to help your members? And that might be virtually, it might be online, it might be something completely new, or it might be something that you need to update. As I've mentioned before, creating a wider awareness of volunteers and what they mean for the club and the sport. So is that some sort of weekly recognition in an email, an award scheme, creating a webpage to help advertise for volunteers, and what sort of roles are available, and the time commitments needed as well, because I think going forwards, time is going to be a really key factor for a lot of people. Extending that key group of volunteers, and then looking at the motivations for individuals to stay at your club. So that brings us back to how I opened this webinar, and obviously with the first impressions. I know there's lots of different strategies out there within clubs, and I think some look at how they get members to begin with. So is it that students coming out or a new member to the club pays a reduced fee in the first year? Is that what makes them stay? Is it that when they turn up at your club, you throw a hat at them or a t-shirt at them, and they feel that they've then got an identity, and they've not paid for that t-shirt. There's obviously costs then back to the club, but they're instantly involved and they feel part of it. Then they're not stuck out. What is it that your club's got over everybody else? So that brings me to a close in terms of the information I wanted to share with you tonight. Hopefully you found it really useful with lots of different information there. I know there was quite a lot being talked through, but I just wanted to raise your awareness to kind of more webinars coming in the future. And then any questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and Sean, I'm sure you've been managing in the background really well for me. So
yeah, thanks very much, Casey. I think we've got a hand up. So you can either pop a question in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and ask a question and have a discussion, that's great.
Hi, it's Rick Summers speaking. It's a question directed, Kerry. All the data that we're asking in that sheet that Casey presented, and Casey, thank you for that. It was excellent. Well done. Is that reasonable stuff to be asking under data protection?
Interesting. I know Kerry's on the. I think I would say, having been on Kerry's. Right, Kerry.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was running around the house.
Right, on your call last week or 2 weeks ago, Kerry, would you say it's talking about that legitimate business interest?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you can sit there as a club and go, we need this for this purpose, and you can clearly evidence that purpose of why you're collecting that information, then yes, it is possible. So if there's certain bits that are optional, you can include optional fields of data, but still give people that choice to disclose it, to not disclose it. And like I said on mine, if you are feeling unsure about any of the certain bits of data, thinking it's a bit of maybe of an area that people might feel that they don't want to disclose that, just give them the option. Or you can do by consent if you think you need this information, like medical information, you're going to need that as a club. So you just put that as it, we definitely need that. But there might be other bits, like if you're starting to build your social media networks, people might want to keep their social media private. They might not want everyone in the club, and that's just an optional thing. And I think it is looking at what you put on your list and go, right, what's our reason? What do we definitely need? What don't we need? What's just preferable? And looking at it through that lens.
Thanks, Kerry. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that we have to be careful what we ask and how we use it. Thank you.
I think we've got another hand up. Rebecca, is it?
Yeah, hi Sean.
Rebecca.
That was great. Thank you very much. Actually, really, really interesting. I had a quick question actually, and it's more of a scenario to sort of raise and address more than anything else. You mentioned earlier about, how often do you get somebody that's new to the club actually join the committee? And I think it probably happens quite a lot in other clubs as well, but especially when you've got quite a well-established club and it kind of starts to somewhat run itself, dare I say, although COVID put a spanner in the works, let's not say that too quick. You end up getting the same people run for committee each time. And so I think there's often that challenge of, okay, and a bit of fear almost, isn't it, when you're kind of like, do I go against somebody who's been, I don't know, captain or something for 6 years, but I want to get on that committee. How do you propose to kind of address that without, changing the status quo and making people that do give their time and do volunteer, year in, year out and do a fantastic job, but actually also making newcomers and people feel welcome and actually giving them the option to kind of put themselves forward? Like, how do you strike that balance, if that makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I know it can be really scary, kind of wanting to put your hand up, and I think a lot of people do think it's upsetting the balance and the mix, and if something's not broken, why try and fix it, kind of thing. But also sometimes it's needed, and fresh faces and change can be really useful. And it might be that someone starts to say that they're interested, and we look at a way that that person who's currently in that role, maybe they do a year handover. So as that person's leaving, the new person coming in, so they don't feel kind of pushed out if they do run against them. Or the other thing is, as you get more established and you get more people that want to have a voice, etc., maybe there's tenures on those roles. I know in clubs I've worked with previously, they've not had tenures on roles, and they've been like, well, why do I need them? Because if someone doesn't want to be here anymore, I'll step down, kind of thing. But actually it allows it to have an ability to kind of to challenge and to feel like they can put their hand forward. And actually sometimes it goes the opposite way, where people are sat on committees that they don't think anyone wants to take that role, so they just run again. It's a really difficult one to manage, and it's very situational as well. But I think if people are open about it and you build a culture where people feel they can express their want to develop, the people who are at the top, it's the same within business. There's always going to be a fear that the CEO at the top is going to be pushed out by somebody underneath them. But realistically, you want to develop those people within your force to come and take your job and know that you've succeeded. So I think it's a really good question, and it's something that everyone kind of shies away from because it's challenge.
Yeah, no, that was great. I was struggling to find a way to answer it without being rude. That's great, thanks.
Anybody else coming through? Any more questions?
I was also just going to add, Sean, if anyone's got specific things they don't want to raise on the webinar, then obviously myself and other members of the regional team will always happy to pick them up outside of this conversation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Katie, what we did last week, I'll drop your email into the chat, and then if anybody's got anything that they want to pick up with you at another time, or they think of something later, they can just drop you an email and get to you that way.
Perfect.
There you go.
Thanks, Sean.
So if we final ask for questions, I know Nick's just popped his face in. How you doing, Nick? You okay?
Yeah, I'm all good. Interested on the questions on the new volunteers trying to get in, and how do you ease them into a committee or whatever you want to call your governing body of your sport. So what I do in my club, and I run a club down in the southwest, is we started to have the vice role. So the captain, the vice captain, the secretary's got a supporting person, so that when that person isn't available, you've got someone to stand in for them. They have a little bit of a title, they feel that they're volunteering, and they ease themselves into the job when that person wants to leave. So you start to do long live the king is dead, blah, 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 and move the next one through. And then if you've got any projects, you use those people to run any projects in your club that are different from the normal run-of-the-mill stuff that the club's doing, and give them a bit more responsibility. And then they feel they have some worth.
I'm not sure. Jonathan's been typing for a while in the chat there, Sean. I'm not sure if.
Yeah, talking about just dividing up roles. I think it's that line of the duties, not jobs in some scenarios, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I thought that was really interesting, because it is. We got there by the fact of if you have the sort of traditional committee roles, they can seem incredibly intimidating, you know, like the secretary or the treasurer or whatever. But actually, I mean, that's what they are. They're a sort of a series of jobs, aren't they? And if you can actually divide them up, firstly, it's a way of introduction. You know, if it's sort of more contained, it's less intimidating. People are more likely to have a go at doing it. So yeah, I think that's and Nick's suggestion about the vice kind of position. We've had difficulties in terms of chair of the club. No one wanting to do it because it's too intimidating. So now we've got, you know, three vice chairs and a chair, and they share the duties. So I think the only thing is that sometimes there are requirements from clubs to nominate roles, aren't there? And you can't escape that. One of the most challenging, I think, in day-to-day is like the captain of teams and the demands on people. And what we find is a real struggle to do that. So we tried to divide up the roles of the captain as well to give sort of people more support in that.
No, and I completely agree, Jonathan. And I guess also like this year, there's lots of new roles that have kind of been forced upon us within COVID. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure most of us have had those fall on the same shoulders, the same broad shoulders as people already carrying a lot of the weight. But actually, you know, if you turn around and say, make a little rota and, you know, you're doing temperatures this week, you're doing it next week, it makes it a lot more manageable. It might not always be a nice thing to have to do and to stand there with a mask on and taking temperatures, but that's the world we're kind of in at the moment, and it makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, I think Nick's just put in about retiring players as well, and I think that can be really hard as well. A lot of players have given so much time and effort that actually when they decide to step away, sometimes they just need a little break. But something I've found previously is that maybe after they've had a year or two, and especially within women, maybe gone off and had babies and come back again, actually, once they've had that break, they do want to give their time again. But it's the immediate ask when you've made that decision to retire. I think people feel like they have to step away, or they want to step away for a bit. So just because they've retired doesn't mean you can't approach them in a couple of years' time, or once, you know, some people do get involved. The mad ones of us out there stay involved and are in for life. But yeah, it's remembering all those different situations, and actually maybe just having like an old boys and old girls day, having a pint and chatting to someone, and then they go, oh, I'd love to get back involved. And you're like, there we go, that's someone back in.
Yeah, sometimes helps to actually spend some time dividing people's roles up into bits, because then you can start to identify which bits can be given to somebody else. So we talk about the captain, Jonathan. On our club, one of the captain's jobs, because we have a set of shirts that are given out to the players and then taken back in, the captain had to wash them ready for the next match. So therefore, we put out a thing for a volunteer and do a rota on people that take the shirts, take them home, stick them in the washing machine, bring them back, and they do a little bit of volunteering. Helps the captain and that kind of stuff. And we did the same with the temperature on a rotation for COVID. So little jobs can be given out, and if you spread them out on a lot of people, it's less onerous, and they get sucked into volunteering.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Don't wash the shirts.
Is succession plan. If you have a succession plan that's distributed, if you like, at every AGM, that shows how many people have done the role and when they're likely to retire, and that gets people thinking about who's done what and when they're going to retire, or when I say retire, step down from that role. So a succession plan is a useful tool also to use within a club.